We start with the paper from Jacek Surzyn from Ignatianum University in Cracow, Poland, and his paper is entitled Heidegger's Only God Can Save Us, a Cry for Transcendence, Not Theism. So, Jacek, the floor is yours.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. It's very nice to present you something what is interested with my philosophical research and philosophical study of the philosophy. Yeah, it will be only the short introduction to the very deeper problematic connected with the problem of the transcendence in the Heidegger's philosophy. I know that the Heidegger's philosophy is most popular, particularly like the symbol of the 20th century, I think. But I concentrate on the problem which is in the Heidegger philosophy not exposed like the central problem. It means the problem of the relation between transcendence and something what Heidegger called divinity or God, but not in the traditional context connected with the religious context, particularly, of course, with the aspect of Christian monotheism. Yeah? I choose to present, of course, the short introduction to the very interesting text. It's an interview given by Martin Heidegger to Rudolf Augstein and Georg Wolf for the magazine Der Spiegel, German magazine Der Spiegel, in September 1966. And Heidegger presented in this interview his point of view to the aspect of connected with his philosophy and particularly with the very, very deeper problem and complicated problem engagement of Heidegger to the Nazi, to the politics and to the Nazi during Second World War. Of course, in this interview, Heidegger tried to interpret his view, his point of view to the problematic of the philosophy in one side and the policy, and maybe some condition of the human being in relation to the world, and of course the much of researcher and interpreters of the Heidegger's thought and the Heidegger's philosophy concentrate rather like the aspect connected with this text, with this interview. It means like the critic of the traditional society, critics of the techniques, and the aspect of the engagement Heidegger to the policy during Second World War, and the most fundamental problem connected with it after the Second World War. It means how to say in short, that Heidegger did not give some very clarified answer to the problem of his engagement to the Nazi during Second World War, and probably the most important and the most discuss is the question of the silence Heidegger to the Nazi and the engage in the Nazi ideology at all. But in this text, the title of this interview, this text is very specific because in the title we have the God, and the title is Only a God Can Save Us. And in my interpretation, I would like to pay attention to the problem of connected with the God and the role of the God, the role of the God in this conception. Maybe some some brief information about this text. I mentioned it before that it was the interview gave by Martin Heidegger to Rudolf Augstein and Georg Wolf, and the German magazine Der Spiegel. But Heidegger asked that the publication of this interview be delayed after his death. And actually, after his death in 1976, in May, this interview was published. My general intention connected with this text is to try to find the place of anonymous God occupies in the Heidegger's thought and it was present in this interview. This aim I try to realize by the short plan presented on the screen, and I would like to analyzing in the short form 5 points, 3 points, and the rest like the recapitulation and conclusion. The first, I would like to take some short present introduction to the Heidegger's philosophy et al., because the problem of the God is of course connected with the Heidegger's philosophy and the Heidegger's critique of the metaphysical, traditional metaphysics. The second point will be connected with the Heidegger's concept of transcendence. The next, the position of the God, and I using the specific term to take some to understand some relation God to the reality, like the crying for transcendence. And I think that in this text, in this review, we could find some aspect of this relation. And the last, of course, the critique, Heidegger's critique of the traditional theism connected with the understanding of God, like the in area of the religion. First of all, the short introduction to the Heidegger's philosophy by the context of the critique of the traditional metaphysics. In my intention, in my opinion, we have the three general problems connected with the Heidegger's philosophy and the critique of traditional metaphysics. The first is this is something what Heidegger called ontological difference. The second is the very specific critique, Heidegger's critique to the traditional dualism connected with the subject-object relation. And the last, of course, is the fundamental question, according to Heidegger, it means the question of being. What does it mean, the ontological difference? If you know the Heidegger's philosophy, the central aspect of the Heidegger's philosophy is the critique of traditional metaphysics, in the point of view that the traditional metaphysics has been forgotten the question of being, the problem of being. Yeah, we have some problem in the English language to correct translate the terms of the Heidegger, because in the German language we have the very specific values between two words connected with the German language grammatical and the aspect of the semantics area. It means in German language we have the verb verb sein, and the name sein, das sein, and also the gerundium, the form seyendes. In English language has some problem, because I try to find some correct differences between these two words, and my proposition is the intuition of the very famous translator of the Heidegger's work. Heidegger's work. It means the Canadian philosopher, Canadian researcher Emmett Allen. He proposed to find some difference in the English language between sein and seyendes, like between being and entity. And I try to use it in my presentation. Of course, Heidegger thinks that in the world we have something like the representation of the entities and multiplicity of the entities, and the fundamental difference, we could say that each entities has not an inner structure, has not the basic to own existence. It means that all beings, all entities revoke something like the being in the principle, in the basic ground. And Heidegger thinks that the whole history of the philosophy is connected with forgetting the first fundamental question about this being. Of course, the most important and the most important representation of the entities in reality is some specific being. It means Dasein is the other difficult term of Heidegger's philosophy to translate to the English language, but not only. In Polish, for example, we have the same problem. But of course, I mention it about later. Now we have the fundamental, according to Heidegger, the fundamental difference between being itself, Sein, and entities, Seyendes, and Heidegger called this difference ontological difference. This fundamental difference determinates some structure of reality. Being is the ground for all entities, the ultimate reality that enlines everything that exists. Beings, it means entities, on the other hand, are the individual entities and that populate in the world. Heidegger contends the traditional metaphysics has erred at the treating of being as the object of knowledge like any other entities. This error, known as ontologization, had led to the misunderstanding the nature of reality. According to Heidegger, being cannot be grasped as the object, but must be approached to the more fundamental understanding of our own existence in our relationship to the world. In this point, like, as the last step, we have the critic, Heidegger's critic, dualism, subject-object dualism. Heidegger's think that it was the most characteristic elements of the tradition, historical tradition of the metaphysics, yeah? And this framework of subject-object dualism has had great consequences to the understanding of the metaphysics and condition of the metaphysics and the philosophy in our time. It means in the 19th centuries. This dualism posits that the world is divided into two distinct realms. The first is the subjective realm of the mind, and the second, the objective realm of the world. Heidegger argues that this dualism is the product of the particular historical and the cultural context and does not accurately reflect to the nature of reality at all. Heidegger suggests that the subject-object distinction is the result of the certain way of understanding being. When being is understood as the object and object of knowledge, it becomes possible to distinguish between the subject who knows and the object that is known. However, Heidegger argues that this distinction is artificial and obscures the more fundamental relationship between being and entities. And in this, on this principles, Heidegger formulated the very famous question, renewing the question of being. And there is the key to understanding the principles of Heidegger's philosophy. The question of being. If you look at the very famous work of Heidegger, Being and Time, Sein und Zeit, the first sentence of this, the beginning of this book is the first sentence connected, the very famous sentence that the problem of the being, the question of the being has been forgotten in the history of the philosophy. It means that the question of being we must renew in the new aspect and try to finding the way to the being itself. And all Heidegger's philosophy is sacrificed to finding and to discover and to describe the possibility of this way to the being itself. And in this context, he analyzing the other questions connected with the structure of the world, the structure of the nature, and condition of the human being, understood by Heidegger like the design, as the design. And Heidegger's critique of the traditional metaphysics leads him to the focus of the question of being as the fundamental question of philosophy. Rather than seeking to understand individual entities, Heidegger argues that we must first ask about the meaning of of being itself. Its shift to focus represents a radical departure from traditional metaphysics, which has often been preoccupied with understanding of properties in the individual entities. By question of being, Heidegger seeks to uncover the underlying structure of the and meaning of reality. He argues that his question cannot be answered with the traditional methods of the scientific inquiry or philosophical analysis. Instead, it requires a more fundamental and existential approach that involves question of our own existence and our relationship to the world. And in this context, Heidegger tried to discover what does it mean that we have something like the transcendence. And Heidegger's understanding of transcendence involves overcoming the limitations of the everyday existence. He argues that our daily lives are often characterized by the preoccupation with the mundane and the practical. We are caught up in routine of the mind's everyday life, and we may lose sight of the deeper meaning and purpose of our existence. Transcendence, for Heidegger, is about the breaking free from these limitations and reaching beyond the confines of our everyday world. It involves a movement towards something higher, something more authentic and meaningful. This movement can take various forms, which are engaging in creative activities, contemplating the mysteries of existence, or experiencing moments of profound connection with the nature, with the world itself. And in this aspect, in this intuition, we find something like the call for authenticity, also the most important aspect of Heidegger's philosophy, because Heidegger links transcendence to living an authentic existence. He thinks that authenticity involves being true to one's and living in accordance with one's own unique possibilities. It involves rejecting the pressure of conformity and inauthenticity of everyday life. This seems to be open realization of authentic existence represented by the specific being existing in the world. It means by Dasein. Dasein we could understand like the human being, the representation of the human being in specific aspect. Transcendence can help us as Dasein to live more authentically by freeing us from the constraints of the social norm and expectations. When we transcend the limitations of the everyday existence, we can become more aware of our own individuality and the unique possibilities that are open to us in something what we could call the relation to transcendence. I call it a crying for transcendence. And what is the role of the Dasein in this structure? The concept of Dasein, in the English language, I find some translation, this word like the being there. But of course, we could understand it like the representation of the human being, specific being in the reality, specific entity in the reality, is a central, of course, aspect of the Heidegger's philosophy. Dasein is not simply a thing or an object in the world, but rather a being that is always already engaged in the world. There is the German term Dasein in der Welt. Dasein is characterized by its unique mode of being, which Heidegger calls care. Care involves a fundamental orientation towards the future, a sense of possibility, and concern for the one's own existence. Dasein's transcendence is linked to its ability to care about itself and its world. By transcending the limitations of the everyday existence, Dasein can become more fully aware of its own possibilities and its place in the world, and there is the way, the path, Dasein to discover being itself. And now I return to the aspect and to the context of connected with this mentioned at the beginning by me. I mentioned the interview, and how Heidegger tried to building some form some location of the God in this aspect of his philosophy. Heidegger used the term God. The intention may be the other. Yeah, the intention of using by Heidegger the term God is not invoked with the traditional theistic deity. Yeah. Rather, God serves as a metaphor for the transcendent power that can liberate us from the limitations of the everyday existence. This transcendent power is not something external to us, but rather something that resides with our own existence. In this review, Heidegger links the problem of divinity, God, with the question of critique of technology and context of the decay and inauthenticity of existence. Heidegger exposed the divine God as transcendence, avoiding an exposure of the traditional religious dimension of God and divinity, but rather seeing the importance of transcendent power to assist Dasein in drift of such discovery, the path to being itself. God as the transcendent power can help us in this way, realize this way. The God is not intended to suggest a supernatural being, but rather a point towards the possibility of radical transformation of our understanding of being and our relation to the world. By transcending the limitation of the everyday existence, we can discover the deeper meaning and purpose in our life. This is the position that I would like to call crying for transcendence. It's very important that in the middle of the review, of this review, Heidegger invokes God and sees him to hope of salvation in the situation in which the world finds itself. Heidegger says that philosophy and the whole sphere of human thinking and striving is unable to do anything here, and that the only salvation remains in God, a transcendent power. Heidegger says, is cited, only God can save us. The only thing we can do is to prepare ourselves in poetry or thought for the appearance of God, or in the fall for the absence of God, ridiculous for the fact that the face of the absence of God, a fall awaits us. In my opinion, this passage from this interview, quite above the reveals precisely what I have called the crying for transcendence. In the dramatic state, Heidegger goes on to point to possibility of awakening the ridiculous of expect such a God, and possibility of which open up a human existence only in the context of rejecting inauthenticity and moving towards the authentic true existence connected with the discovery of being itself. And in this point, yeah, we have the short critique of the traditional theism, I mentioned it about before, because the God, the divinity, according to Heidegger, is not connected with the religious aspect, yeah, and the God is rather the representation of something what we could call the transcendent, the power of transcendent, something what is the horizon of our thinking and all realities. And maybe some, at the end of my short presentation, maybe some recapitulation and some conclusion. In this presentation, I have explored Heidegger's concept of transcendence as presented in his review. I present his critique of the traditional metaphysics, his understanding of the transcendence as overcoming the limitations of the everyday existence, and his use of God as a metaphor for transcendent power, and his role in discover by design true existence and the way to being itself. In this perspective, Heidegger's understanding of God is not some traditional version of theism, but there is strong connected with the description of ontological structure of reality. Heidegger's notion of God is profound invitation to explore the limitations of human understanding. It's not a theological assertion, but a recognition of the human condition's inherent incompleteness. By positing the transcendent dimension, Heidegger challenged us to move beyond the confines of empirical knowledge and to seek meaning in the world often dominate in the by instrumental reasoning. I believe that we can discover this intention in this text. This research for transcendence is not retreat for the world, but deeper engagement with it. It requires a philosophical rigorous, the question of foundation of our thinking, allowing for a new perspective and possibilities to emerge. Heidegger's thought offers a pathway, a more authentic and fulfilling existence in care that is rooted in wonder, curiosity, and respect for the mystery of being. Well, we may never fully comprehend the nature of this transcendent dimension. The pursuit itself is transformative. It invites us to live with a sense of openness, humility, and responsibility towards the world and its inhabitants. Thank you very much for your attention. It's, in my opinion, the deeper something what we could find in this text, like of course the introduction, only the introduction to the very deeper and the very wider problematic, because about the God and divinity we also find some very deeper analyzing connected with Heidegger thought in the other works. It means in contribution to philosophy, in Sein und Zeit, and the others, Heidegger's work. But in my opinion, this interview is not only about the policy and the politics of the Heidegger and his engagement in the fascists or Nazis during the Second World War, but rather something what could find us the very specific aspect of understanding the God in divinity, connected with the philosophical research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.